I live with my husband in a house that we've had for a few years now. Last year, something crazy occurred. We know some of the neighbors, but not everyone. Some I will just recognize, and others I've actually talked to and are friends with. People around here seem nice, and we've never had any problems with anyone. Generally, nothing crazy has happened here, and things will usually be pretty calm and quiet. For a little more background, I work a job where I get there early and generally am back home by 3 p.m. and sometimes 2. My husband will arrive home at a more normal time of around 5 or so, and we both work on weekdays. So one day, after I got back from work, my cell phone rang from a number that I didn't recognize, but it had a local area code. I answered it out of curiosity. It was a woman on the other end who I didn't recognize by her voice, but she sounded friendly. She said that she was my neighbor from down the street, and she had got my number from another neighbor. She then asked me if her son could stay at my house when he got home the following day. The reason was because she would be gone for work, and she just wanted me to have him stay here until she was back. Without really giving it much thought, I said sure, it would not be a problem. Now, I was wondering some things in my head, but I didn't ask them because I didn't want to seem rude. Like, for example, why did she ask me? I was fairly confident that I had never met this lady before, and I didn't even know exactly what house she lived in. Why would she trust me with her son when we had never met? But really, I assumed that she probably had spoken to the neighbors, and they had vouched for me. How did she know I would be home at that time also? Again, I thought probably the neighbors told her. I wasn't sure though, but I had talked about my job and other stuff to some neighbors. So I wasn't being suspicious or anything, and really I was just confused. I thought maybe the lady was new to the neighborhood and didn't really know anyone, and maybe the other neighbors weren't able to watch her kid first. I didn't mind watching her son, and I'm pretty good with kids and have watched friends' children in the past. So she told me that her son would come over at about 3 o'clock the following day, and when she got back from work, she could pick him up. I said okay, and we left it at that. I figured it would be easy, and he could just sit in the living room for a couple hours and watch TV or something. I told my husband about it when he got back, and he was just like, cool. So the next day after I got back from work, there was no call or anything from the neighbor, but I luckily remembered. Shortly after 3 p.m., there was a knock at the front door. I went over and opened it, and was shocked at what I saw. There was no child there, but a tall, skinny-looking grown man standing outside my front door. He was young, looked to be early 20s, but he was definitely an adult nonetheless. When I opened the door, he smelled of cigarettes and alcohol. He had an overall dirty appearance. I was shocked. He then opened the door further and just walked right in with a backpack over his shoulder, saying a casual, "Hey, what's up?" After a moment, I said, "Who are you?" He said, "Didn't my mom tell you that I was coming over?" I said, "Yeah, but I thought you were like 7 or 8 years old." He said no, he was 25. What he said next shocked me even more. He said, "Yeah, I just need a place to stay until my mom comes back from her work trip in a few days." I was thinking, what? A few days? I asked him what he meant, and he told me that he would be staying here, and he asked where he would sleep. I told him I thought there was a misunderstanding, and not only did I think he was a young child, but I thought he would only be staying here for a few hours. His mom said nothing about it. I told him that we didn't have any space for him to stay the night. He started talking about how he didn't have anywhere to go, and how his girlfriend had kicked him out and stuff. I asked him why he can't stay at his mom's place without her being there, and he said that she had kicked him out too, and it was complicated. I didn't want to get into his family drama, and maybe he was going through a rough patch, but it wasn't fair for him to be dumped on me like this. I told him I was sorry, but he had to go. This is where his attitude seemed to change. He got slightly angry and said no, he was staying here, because I said he could. I told him once again to leave. That's when he said no once more, and he walked farther into the house. He went upstairs, almost running. I went after him, but when I got up there, he had run into our bedroom and shut the door and locked it behind him. I tried to get him to come out, but he was ignoring me. So then I called my husband and told him of the situation. He said he was on his way home. Then I tried reasoning with the guy, but he was completely ignoring me. I threatened to call the police, but that didn't seem to have an effect on him. I was seriously going to call the cops, but decided to wait until my husband got back. I then attempted to call the guy's mom, but when I did, the number appeared to have blocked me, because the calls would not go through. I went downstairs and just hoped that the guy wasn't going to steal or damage anything. My husband arrived home a short time later, and the guy was still up there. My husband went upstairs and started banging on the door and threatening to beat the guy up and stuff. After like 5 minutes of this, it finally got him to leave. He left the bedroom and ran down the stairs, practically being chased by my husband. He left and sprinted away down the street. We looked, and nothing was stolen or messed up, thankfully. After that, I tried to figure out if they really lived on our street or not. I asked a few neighbors, but none of them said they gave my number to anyone else. So I really don't know who this woman was or how she got my number. I think maybe she did live down the street, or at least in the area, because I know there are a lot of houses on the block, and also she had to have known what time I get home every day, and I think that she might have been watching me. But it remains a bit of a mystery. I'm certainly going to ask more questions next time someone asks me to watch their kid. I used to work as a delivery driver for UPS many years ago now. There is one memory that stands out as being the craziest and also the scariest thing that ever happened to me when I worked there. So I'd been working there for over a year at this point. I drove a standard brown UPS truck and made deliveries around the city that I worked in. The city was pretty large, and it had a busy area and then a quieter area as well. After a long day of work, I was down to my last few deliveries for the day. It was getting later, and I was looking forward to being done and going home. So I remember I stopped in this neighborhood to make a delivery. I pulled over to the side of the road, got out, opened the back, got the package, and then went up to the house and delivered it. I went back and got in my truck after that and then left. So I then left the neighborhood and had a bit of a drive before the last spot where I was making a few final deliveries. In the process of driving there, within a couple of minutes, I started to hear what sounded like a noise coming from the back of my truck. At first, I just dismissed it, but I soon realized that it really sounded like someone or something was back there. It made no sense, though. Why would there be a noise in the back of my truck? I kept listening to the sound, and it wasn't constant, but it was a sound that I had not heard at all prior to that during the day. It sounded as though someone was moving around back there, and the packages were moving around. I decided to see what was up. I happened to be driving on a pretty quiet road at that moment. It was sort of winding, and it was in the quieter part of town. To the right was a ditch and a bit of grass, and then woods. To the left was some houses that were fairly spread out. There was a good amount of space on the side of the road to pull over, and after doing so, I listened more. The noises quieted down, but it sounded as though someone was walking around in the back of my truck. I was pretty creeped out by this, so I got out and walked closer to the back. Then I shouted, asking if anybody was in there. No one answered me. I went to the back door and opened it just a crack. I yelled that if anybody was in my truck, the door was open and they needed to leave. But still, there was nothing. I didn't open the door all the way because, to be honest, I was too creeped out. After I said that, though, nobody left. I wasn't quite sure what to do. After about a minute, I decided to open the doors all the way and see. I went to the door and opened it. But as soon as I did, I was rushed. Whoever was inside the truck suddenly ran up and then kicked me. They came running really fast, and they kicked at me, and I would have been kicked right in the face, but I moved my head just in time. The kick got me in the shoulder and part of my head. It knocked me back, and I fell to the ground. A man then emerged, and I really barely saw him because it all happened so fast, but he then ran past me and into the woods. I watched from the ground as he quickly disappeared into the trees like a wild animal might. I was slightly hurt, but not bad. I got to my feet and then called the cops and went back inside my truck. Then I waited for them to arrive. By the time they got there about 5 minutes later, I told them everything. However, when they searched around, the man was gone. I gave the best description that I could, but I didn't remember any great details. I was then able to finish and go home. I don't believe the man was ever found. It's one of the craziest things that I've ever seen. I'm not sure when exactly the man entered my truck. I think it was when I made the last delivery, because that's when I started hearing him. He could have been walking down the street or something and entered my truck when I was up at the house making the delivery. My back would have been to the truck at that point, and also the back of my truck would have been open. Plus, there were still some boxes in there that he could have hid behind, and it was dark in the truck as well, so I probably wouldn't have noticed him. But overall, it was just crazy how it happened. Back when I was in high school, I used to love gym classes. I was not a bad student, but I really wasn't the smartest either, and I didn't particularly enjoy most classes. Gym class was a class where you didn't really have to know much. You could just be physically active and play sports. For this one gym class, I don't recall which one it was, but I was a sophomore in high school. I was in this class with one of my best friends named Adam. We would talk and hang out all the time. At this particular time of the year, we would go outside sometimes for gym as the weather was nice. It was the second period of the day, so it was still pretty early in the morning. One day during gym class, we went outside to the fields behind the school. There was a large area behind the school where all the sports fields were. There was football, baseball, soccer, some practice fields, tennis, and beyond that was a large woods. We were out in one of the open practice fields playing ultimate frisbee or something like that. I remember that in the middle of this, a school lockdown ensued. The teacher blew his whistle and called everybody to the front of the field. There was probably 20 to 30 kids in the class, and just the teacher to look after us. He told us that the school was going into a lockdown, so we would be entering the school and going into the gym and waiting there. So he told everybody to get in line. From where Adam and I were, though, we realized that it would be easy not to go in. We didn't want to go into the school and wait out a lockdown. Who knows how long that would take? Plus, it would be more dangerous to be in the school probably. That was our thinking. Really, we were just being immature kids wanting to get out of class, but we decided to run off and wait out the lockdown outside. When it was over, we could then have a friend let us back in the school during passing time between classes. We obviously didn't think it out too much, and we also obviously weren't too worried about the actual lockdown. We had only had one other one prior to that in our high school careers, and I remember that it was for nothing major, just a minor little thing. So anyways, we got the idea to leave and decided to do it. So when everyone was walking back to the school, we went in the other direction for the woods. We were easily able to get away from the class without our teacher noticing. We ran along the side of the fields and then went into the woods a short ways. The woods there were not huge, but there was a good amount of trees, and you could stay hidden pretty easily. We then texted one of our friends who was not in our class, but in another one. Adam asked him what the lockdown was for, and told him that we were going to hang out outside until it was over. Our friend said that he didn't know, but he just said that there was a lockdown and that was it. He agreed that when it was over and when class was dismissed, he would let us in a back door to the school. That's because all the doors were locked during the day aside from the main front door, and there you had to go by someone. So Adam and I sat on the edge of a tree branch just in the woods and looked back at the school. We went on our phones and talked. I was feeling glad that we were not in the school for the lockdown. We were both wondering what it was for though and how long it would last. Neither of us could ditch school and go home or anything like that, because we were both too young to drive still, so we didn't have cars. We also didn't live close enough to the school to walk home. And with it being only second hour, we had to go back for our next class. About 10 minutes into being outside on our own, we heard a number of cars driving down the street in front of the school. That street was normally fairly quiet, as the school was not right on any kind of super busy road. We looked over, and even though it was really far away, we could see part of the street to the left of the school building, and then we could see all the fields right in front of us. I remember noticing about 5 police cars driving really fast down the street, headed for the school. That's when I actually got kind of nervous. I thought that maybe the lockdown was for something bad, and not just them being overly safe for something minor like before. I guess I had just assumed that it wasn't really anything bad. We were texting back and forth with our other friend. He still knew nothing though. After all the cop cars arrived, they went to the front of the school, so they were now out of our sight. Probably 1 or 2 minutes later, we saw something else. There was this man that emerged behind the school. I didn't notice if he left through a back door of the school or came around from the side of the building or what. I only really noticed him when he was already behind the school but still really far away from us. Adam saw him as well at about the same time. We didn't recognize him. The man was walking and then picked up the pace and started jogging. He went through the sports practice fields where our gym class had been playing. Then he started jogging straight for us. We ducked down, even though he most likely couldn't see us at all. I'm not sure why, but neither of us ran away. Instead, we hid. We both went behind a large tree that we were near in a small clearing. We got low to the ground and became quiet, so I couldn't see anymore, but I then heard footsteps approaching the woods. That's when I got really nervous. The man then entered the woods right in front of us. He walked to the right to the other side of the tree and then stopped. Adam and I literally held our breath. Then, after what felt like forever but was probably 5 to 10 seconds, the man started walking through the woods past us. His footsteps then got farther and farther away. Adam and I both then got up at once and began running back for the school. We didn't stop until we had made it all the way to the front. We saw police cars and a few officers. They seemed confused as to why we were outside, but we told them what happened. The next thing we knew, we were waiting outside the school with a few officers and school staff. This went on for a while until we were told that it was safe to go back inside and the lockdown was over. It turns out the man was a suspicious person that had been seen in the school. He fled after a staff member saw him, but nobody knew where he went. He left the school and ran into the woods. The cops found him a short time later after we told them where he went. He was only a few blocks away from the woods in the neighborhood behind it. So on one hand, Adam and I learned a valuable lesson to not do dumb stuff like that because it was terrifying. But on the other hand, we kind of helped the police catch the guy. I live in what I've always considered to be a quiet and safe neighborhood. Nothing much seems to happen here. The houses are slightly spread out, and it's not quite out in the country, but not that close to the city either. I know most of the neighbors, and I'm friends with a good amount of them. A few years ago, I was at home with my wife, and it got to be late. The weather was nice, and I had been doing a little bit of work out in the garage. Nothing that crazy, just messing around with some old junk. I left the door open because I had many times before, and nothing had ever happened. When I was inside and it was getting pretty late, like after 10 p.m., I heard my wife say something. She said that it looked like Jeff was coming over. He's a neighbor that lived a short ways down the street. I knew him decently well, and I had talked to him many times before. Occasionally, we would stop by each other's places if we saw each other outside working on something or something like that. I went over to the window and wondered why he would be coming over so late at night. I watched Jeff walk up the driveway, but instead of going and turning to go to the front door, he went straight. This led him straight towards the garage and out of my sight. I thought that he must have been thinking I was still in the garage, so I went to get my shoes on and go outside. Within probably a minute, I left the house. I walked over to the garage, but when I got there, Jeff was gone. He was not in the garage and was nowhere in sight. I called out, but got no response. It was so strange, because I knew that I had just seen him walk up my driveway. I went in the backyard and then went back to the front, and he just wasn't there. But then, after going back in the garage, I noticed something. A few of my things were gone. Could Jeff have stolen them? Nothing else made any sense. I went back inside and told my wife about the crazy situation. She didn't know what to make of it. I decided to go over and talk to Jeff the following day. So the next day I went to his house and knocked on the door, but he did not answer. I was a little suspicious, but maybe he just wasn't home. After that, though, I was always sure to close my garage. So sometime, maybe a week later or so, I happened to notice Jeff outside. I walked up and approached him, and he seemed normal at first. I told him how I saw him walking up my driveway the other night, but he completely denied it. I told him he took my stuff, but he denied that too. He said that he thought I must be joking. To be nice, I said I must be mistaken then, and then I left. I didn't want to get into a big argument with my neighbor. I didn't think it was worth it. The stuff that he stolen was valuable, but not that valuable. I wasn't that desperate to get it back. So I went back home, and since then we haven't spoken. I know he took my stuff. I think he saw the garage door open, thought that I had gone to bed, and simply walked in and took it. But to be safe and avoid being seen, he left the garage through the back door and then cut through my neighbor's yard to go back home. It's pretty crazy how he did that. I'm hoping that nothing more like that happens, but I'm going to be careful around him. One time back when I was in high school, I was left home alone for a weekend. My older sister was off at college, and my parents were both going to a friend's wedding that was out of town. They left on Friday and would be back on Sunday. In the meantime, I would be alone at the house for that time. It was not a big deal at all, because I had been home by myself many times. I was, I believe, a sophomore, so I was still too young to drive, but I figured I would just hang out around the house after school during the weekend. After my parents left, I went to school, and then I came home and was by myself. It was a relaxing night of just watching TV, eating pizza, and playing around on my phone. I stayed up later than usual because I didn't have school the next day. I was in the living room with most of the lights out and the TV on at a low volume. I was watching YouTube or something on my phone and was going to go to bed soon as I started to get tired. It was probably after 10 p.m. or so, maybe later, and there was suddenly a knock at the front door. It totally took me by surprise, because obviously I was not expecting anyone. Being home by myself, and with it being late at night, this made me a little bit nervous. But I honestly didn't think it was anything that bad. I really didn't want to answer the door regardless of who it was though, so I stayed on the couch, hoping they would just go away, but they knocked again. I decided at that point to go and see who was there, so I got up and moved over to a window. When I did, I looked to see a man standing there by the front door holding a small box in his hand. He also had a hat that looked like it was from a delivery company. I felt super relieved when I realized that it was just a delivery guy. He knocked on the door again though, now for a third time. This time he said, "Delivery." I was a little bit confused, because first of all, it was late at night, but also, why could he not just drop the package and go? I guess some packages require someone to sign for it, but how could we be expected to do so at an hour when many people are sleeping? I wasn't sure what he was delivering either. I hadn't ordered anything, but my parents possibly could have. I figured they did. The man knocked again, and once more he said, "I have a delivery for you." I didn't think that he knew I was in there. It would have been impossible for him to see me, but I was figuring he wasn't allowed to make the delivery unless someone answered the door or something like that. So as much as I didn't want to answer the door so late at night, I also didn't want my parents to miss their package and have to go pick it up someplace. So I walked over to the door to answer it. When I got there, I was literally like a foot from the door and about to open it when I heard the man try opening the door from the other side. I froze. The guy was trying the handle. I could not believe that he was trying to just walk into the house. I certainly was not going to open the door for him now. He didn't stop there though. The man then basically seemed to throw himself against the door with his whole body. I heard a very loud thud. It was like he was trying to break the door down. I took a couple steps away. He did it again though. He was seemingly backing up a few steps and then ramming into the door with his shoulder or something to try to force it open. The guy really wanted to deliver the package, I guess. Either that or he was trying to break into the house, and the package delivery was just a ruse to get me to open the door. I figured that it was probably the latter. I did what really just came to my mind in that moment, which was to turn on the lights. One switch went to that front door area inside the house, and the other to outside. When I turned both these lights on at once, the man suddenly stopped. Then he started running away. I heard him leave the front door area, and then I looked out a window and saw him sprint out the yard and down the street. At that point, I called the cops. They came out and investigated, but the guy was long gone. I really didn't have a great description either. After that, they left. I was really nervous to go to sleep that night, but thankfully, the guy never returned. He was obviously a fake delivery guy. I think either he wanted me to answer the door, or he was just pretending to be a delivery guy to not look suspicious in case another neighbor saw him. Either way, it was extremely creepy. I also sometimes wonder if he knew that my parents were out of town because their car was gone, so the driveway was empty. So possibly, when I went to the door, he was startled not thinking anybody was home. When I was a senior in high school, I spent one of my class's first semester as a teacher's assistant for a history teacher in the school. It was a teacher who I really liked and I had had in the past. I would help with any tasks that she needed me to do, which oftentimes was grading papers. I would only have to grade the easy ones, which were assignments with definitive answers, so I didn't have to make judgment calls. It was easy work, but it just took a while. The classroom was sort of at one far end of the school where things were a lot quieter. One day, the teacher gave me a big stack of assignments to grade, and the class was going to the computer lab for the entire period. So I was told that I could stay in the classroom and work if I wanted to. I chose to do so, as there was more space, it would be quieter, and I could also slack off more if I wanted. So they left, and it was just me alone in the giant classroom. I sat at a random desk and got to work grading assignments. Maybe 20 minutes into the class period, and I heard this sound over the intercom. It was followed by an announcement that the school was being locked down, and this was not a drill. This was an interesting situation for me to be in, because I was all by myself in this classroom. I thought about if I should go back to the computer lab or not, but I figured that I shouldn't. I didn't have keys with me or anything, and they might lock the doors. Plus, I wouldn't be able to lock this classroom if I left it. So instead, I walked up to the front of the room, locked the door from the inside, and then turned out the lights. I knew to do those things from the drills that we had had. I was wondering obviously what the lockdown was for, and I really had no idea. So I sat back down at the desk and waited. I texted with some friends, but nobody seemed to know what was happening. After like 10 minutes, I got kind of bored, so I moved to a desk in the back because there was a small lamp that was by it. That way I could keep working without turning all the lights on. So I moved back there and continued to grade assignments. This went on for about another 10 minutes or so. It was very quiet there with nobody else around and nothing going on. Out of nowhere, I heard somebody try opening the classroom door. It was quiet and it made me stop what I was doing. At first, I thought that I was just imagining it because it was so quiet. I listened to hear if it would happen again. At first, there was nothing. Then, maybe 30 seconds later, I heard it again. Then again. Somebody was now trying to open the door over and over, which was locked. This went on for a good 30 seconds to a minute. I was too creeped out to get up and see who was there. The sounds eventually stopped, and things were quiet for another maybe 30 seconds. I was about to get up, but then I heard a quiet knocking on the door to the classroom. It was a very soft knock, and it creeped me out even more. They just knocked once, though. I thought that there was a chance that maybe it was the teacher or a student that was in the class, but I didn't know why they would be out in the hallway at this time. I walked over to the door and then moved the shade to look out the small window. I saw no one. Then I actually unlocked and opened the classroom door to look out into the hallway. When I did, nobody was there. I went back into the classroom and locked the door again. Then I sat back down and continued grading papers. There were no more knocks on the door or anything, but I was really creeped out for the rest of the time. The lockdown ended up going for another 30 minutes or so, and then it was over. The class was let out from the computer lab, and I went on with the school day. I tried to figure out what the lockdown was for, but I never got an answer from anyone. Everyone I asked either didn't know or said different things, so I can't confirm as to what was going on. I still don't know who it was trying to enter the room. Was it the person who caused the lockdown, or was it another student or something like that? Either way, it was really creepy. When I moved to my new apartment, everything in my life felt like it was finally working out. I had just been promoted at work after years of grinding. My salary doubled, I bought my first new car, and I was finally leaving my cramped studio for a real apartment. It was a corner unit on the 8th floor with a wide window that looked over the river and the downtown lights. The building looked older from outside, but the apartment itself was great. 2 bedrooms, a decent kitchen, a living room big enough for the couch I had been saving for, and the rent was also lower than anything else I had seen in that area. I signed the lease that same day. The move-in was exhausting, and that night I sat on the couch eating takeout and watching random shows until I passed out. Sometime after midnight, I woke up to noises above me. It sounded like someone stomping on the floor above me. I checked the time, and it was 2:15 a.m. I didn't want to start trouble with my neighbors on the first night, so I ignored it. I put in earbuds and went back to sleep. The next night, the same thing happened, but I figured maybe the people upstairs had just moved in too. But the next night, the same thing happened again. Sometimes I heard what sounded like objects hitting the floor. One night, it sounded like dishes were breaking. Another time, I thought I heard a woman shouting, but the words were muffled and short. It went on every night. By the 6th day in my new apartment, I was barely sleeping. I started coming home from work already stressed, just waiting for it to start again. On Friday night, I got back at around 10:30 p.m. I showered and laid in bed scrolling on my phone. Eventually, the noises started again. That was the moment I decided I was done ignoring it. I put on my shoes and went upstairs. I knocked lightly and then harder a couple times, and stood there for a good 5 minutes waiting for someone to open the door, but nobody came. Confused, I went back down to my apartment, figuring they didn't want to confront me. The next morning was Saturday, and after another long night of noise, I decided I would deal with it once and for all. I grabbed my phone and called the building's front desk. I got no answer though, so I waited a few minutes, threw on my shoes, locked my door, and headed to the stairwell to head down to the main lobby. The stairwell lights were off for some reason, so it was darker than usual. As I started down the stairs, I heard footsteps behind me. They were slow at first, but then they matched my pace. By the time I reached the 6th floor, they sounded closer and were speeding up. I didn't know why, but my chest got tighter and I felt the urge to run down the stairs the rest of the way. As I sped up and ran down the stairs as fast as I could, I heard footsteps behind me accelerating into a run. I ran the rest of the way down and pushed the doors to the lobby. The guard was sitting at the desk, and I told him all about the problems I'd been having with my neighbors upstairs. He looked confused and said that he had only started working there 2 days ago. He didn't know anything about the building yet or the residents, but he mentioned the previous guard had worked there over 10 years and lived a few streets away. He gave me the address. I drove there immediately, and the old guard was very friendly and let me into his place. I explained everything I had been dealing with yet again to the older guard. Eventually, he sighed and told me there used to be a couple living in that unit above me. They argued all the time, and everyone in the building could hear it. He went on to say that one night the husband snapped, and the neighbors heard fighting, things breaking, and someone screaming. The man had killed his wife in that apartment directly above me, and the police took him away that same night. After that, every tenant who moved into the unit below complained about the same noises that I had described, so that had forced me to move out of my dream apartment after only a week, which apparently was the longest anyone had lasted in my unit. When I was younger, I used to work for this local restaurant that was in my hometown. It was a place that was well known in the city, and I worked there for over a year. In my time there, I did several different things. At one point, I was the main delivery driver. We offered online ordering, or people could just call in and order as well. Even though we were not a pizza place, it worked pretty much the same way as pizza delivery does. I would go out and deliver the food to wherever. The town I lived in was pretty average for the most part, as some parts were busier and others quiet. So one night when I was working, we got an order for a delivery. I took it and was going to drive it to the address. At this point, it was a little bit later and things had quieted down. We would also be closing pretty soon as well. So I took the food, left the restaurant, and headed out to my car. Then I drove to the address. It was about 10 minutes away, in a quieter end of town. After driving to the neighborhood, I saw that it was pretty average looking. I had not been there before, but I found the address and parked my car on the side of the road out front. Now, this house had a fairly large front yard, and the house was normal looking for the most part. There were a good amount of trees in the area and just a few dim streetlights along the block, so the lighting wasn't the greatest. I stepped out of my car and took the bag of food. When I started walking up the driveway to the house, I realized that none of the lights appeared to be on. The house was almost completely dark. I made it up to the front step, only to see a piece of paper taped to the door that said, "Back door, please." I wasn't too thrilled to see that, but maybe the door didn't work or something. So I walked around the house back over to the driveway and I saw a side door, but that one also had a piece of paper on it that said, "Back door." So I walked all the way around the house and was now in the backyard. Here it was much quieter. The backyard was not very big, but it was fenced in with a wooden fence, had overgrown grass, and some random junk lying around the yard. There was also a good number of trees and bushes in the backyard. I felt kind of creeped out going back there. I located the back door though, and then knocked on it, as there was no doorbell to ring. I was just hoping that this would be a normal interaction, and that somebody would just come to the door, take the food, and pay me. Oh yeah, I should mention that the order had not been paid for yet. So I needed to get the money, and I couldn't just drop the food and leave like I wanted to. At first, nobody came to the door. The lights in the back of the house all appeared off as well. I nervously looked around. Everything was calm back there, and it was pretty quiet aside from the leaves blowing in the wind. I was about to knock again when I heard the sound of footsteps approaching the door from inside the house. I got even more nervous. Now, I had made many deliveries before, but for some reason I was way more nervous here. Then the door opened. There, standing in front of me, was a tall man who was wearing all black, including a ski mask. He had black shoes, sweatpants, a long-sleeve shirt, and then a mask covering his entire head aside from his eyes. I was really confused and creeped out to say the least. The man did not say anything, but I reached out and handed him the food. He took it, and I told him the price. The guy still said nothing, but then waved me to come more inside. He He took a few steps back into the house, motioning for me to follow. I stayed just outside the house and said, "No thanks, I can just wait here." I assumed that he was going to get the money. I didn't know if he was trying to freak me out, or if this was just his preferred clothing choice around the house at night. He then stepped back towards me, still motioning for me to follow. I remained where I was. Then he got even closer and reached out and sort of grabbed my arm. To be honest, it wasn't an aggressive grab like he was trying to suddenly pull me into the house. It was more of an encouraging touch to say, "Come on in." But still, as soon as he reached out, I jumped back and just took off. I ran away, sprinting back around the house and not stopping until I made it all the way back to my car. He did not chase after me at all to my knowledge, but still, I didn't care. I drove away and was so relieved to just be out of there. I made it back to the restaurant and told my boss of what happened. He was not mad or anything, thankfully, and he understood. Instead, we put the address on the Do Not Deliver list. In the rest of my time working there, I never delivered to that street again. Personally, that experience still creeps me out to think about it. I'm not sure what that man was doing or what his intentions were. Perhaps he was just trying to scare me and thought it was funny. But I would advise anybody ordering food to not come to the door with all the lights off wearing all black and a ski mask. It might scare the delivery driver. Something really scary happened to me when I was in high school. It all started one day when I was a junior. To that point, it had seemed like a very normal school year. I was kept very busy as I was involved in sports, school activities, and had a lot of friends as well. This was in first semester, and I played on the volleyball team, so we had practices or games on most days. My best friend Rachel and I had a class together during third period. Between every class, we had our lockers next to each other, and we would hang out by them and other people in our grade. So I remember that one day Rachel and I got to our class. Most of the hour went by like normal, but sort of towards the end, there was suddenly an announcement for a lockdown. Everyone in the class got nervous and was wondering what it could be about. We followed the lockdown procedure. All the students had to move to the back of the classroom. The door was locked and the lights were turned out. We were all told to be quiet. This went on for about 30 to 45 minutes probably. Then it was over. It was announced that it was safe to return to classes like normal. Obviously, the period was over by then, so we left the class and went into passing time. When I got back to my locker, I saw that there was a small sticky note on it which had not been there before. I looked at it, and written on the inside was a handwritten note which said, "I'll be waiting for you." I was very confused when I saw this. I didn't know what it meant or who it was from. I showed it to Rachel, who was just as confused as I was. So we asked a few friends nearby, thinking maybe it was a joke, but nobody knew anything. I didn't connect it to the lockdown at all at that point, as it just wasn't on my mind to do so. I was wondering what the lockdown was for, and a lot of people were talking about it. Nobody seemed to know, though. The only thing I heard was someone say that someone else said some guy was in the school. You know how rumors can be made up or travel in a high school, so I didn't know if this was true or not. But either way, it was safe now as we were allowed to return to classes. The rest of the school day went on as normal. After school, I had volleyball practice, which didn't start right away because we had to wait to get in the gym. So I hung out at the school with my teammates. We then had practice, and it wasn't until like 6 p.m. that I was done for the day and could go home. So I left and then went to drive back. By now, the school was quiet and it was getting dark outside as well. After I left the school, I remember that a car pulled out onto the road behind me and started following me. I didn't know that it was following me at first, but then it got really close. When I turned, it turned as well. This continued, and I was annoyed as to why it was following me so close. However, I did not recognize the car or know who might possibly be driving it. I continued to drive home, which would take me almost 15 minutes. The more turns I made, the car was still there. I was getting worried and wondering what I should do. I could not tell at all who was driving. I could just barely see the figure of a person in the driver's seat. It was just too far away and too dark to see any details. When I was getting close to my neighborhood, the car was still there. It was literally just us two out on the road. Before our street, I started driving around the block. The car was still there. I started turning randomly, which the car would do as well. Every turn I made, it made. I then took out my phone and called my dad because I was freaking out. He He told me to keep driving and not stop, and he was on his way. I stayed on the line with him, and he asked me where I was. He then drove out in his truck and got behind the car that was following me. At first he honked, but the car did nothing and continued following. It was then a line of us 3 cars randomly driving down these residential streets at night. My dad then drove right up behind the car. He actually hit the back of the car with his truck, not that hard, but bumping him. He honked again. The car then turned at the next street, which is not where we were going, and it sped away. We then went back home, and my dad called the cops as well. We told them about what had happened. It was then after the dust had settled and I was back home that I started to connect the lockdown to the note and to the guy following me. I wondered if someone was stalking me. I went on my Instagram account and realized that I had a bunch of message requests from a user. I hadn't realized this because they didn't show up with the normal messages. You had to click over to requests, which I never did. This user had been sending me messages for days. They started out fairly normal, but eventually he said that he was going to find me and come to my school. I showed them to my principal the following day, and the police got called in. I told them everything, and they did an investigation. I remember that they ended up finding the guy, thankfully. It was a pretty crazy situation, though. I hadn't noticed because I had just been so busy with everything, but I'm glad that nothing bad ended up happening. My girlfriend and I have been together for a little over 2 years now. Not long after we started dating, she moved into my place. I'd been living there alone for a while, so having someone around felt different at first, but in a good way. The house is small, but the yard is big for the area. When summer came around, we decided to make the most of it. We bought one of those above-ground pools from a hardware store and set it up behind the garage. It wasn't anything fancy, but it was perfect for hot afternoons after work. We started inviting friends over on weekends. Sometimes we'd grill, other times we'd sit around a fire pit built with leftover bricks. One night we had a few people over, just relaxing and having a couple drinks. It was getting late when a man from the house behind ours walked through the alleyway to our yard. I had seen him before but never really talked to him. He introduced himself and started chatting like he had known us for years. He talked about the weather, the neighborhood, and our dog. Then he started asking about the pool. He kept looking at it while he talked. "Looks nice," he said. "Must be good on days like this." My girlfriend and I said yeah, it was nice to cool off after work. Then he said something like, "I wish I had something like that, and I see you two out there all the time." He was probably around 50 or so. We were both in our early 20s. I didn't think much of it at the time. I'm usually pretty easygoing with neighbors, so I told him if he ever wanted to swim, he could just ask us and let us know. A few weeks later, I was still at work one afternoon when my girlfriend called me. She told me she had gotten home early that day. Our driveway curves around the house, so you can't see the backyard from the street. When she walked into the kitchen, she looked out the window above the sink. That window looked straight into the yard, and the neighbor was in our pool, just floating there. She told me she froze for a second because she didn't expect to see anyone back there. I told her to stay inside and I would be home as soon as I could. By the time I got back, he was gone. I was mad. I knew I had told him he could swim sometime, but I meant with permission, not just showing up when nobody was home. So I took the ladder off the pool and put it in the shed so that nobody could use it unless we took the ladder out. Later that evening, I saw the guy outside while walking the dog. I told him he couldn't just come into our yard like that. He apologized and said he thought it was fine because of what I had said before. He promised it wouldn't happen again. For a while, things were quiet. But after that, we started noticing him more often. He would stand in his yard and look towards our house. Sometimes he would be out there when my girlfriend got home from work. Sometimes it was late at night, too. Around that same time, we were talking with some other neighbors down the street, and his name came up. One of them told us something that shocked me. Apparently, the guy had a history. They said he had been in trouble before involving a family member. They didn't know all the details, but they said it was serious. That already made things uncomfortable. Then another neighbor told us something that was even worse. They said the guy had been bragging to another neighbor that he could see inside our house at night. He had been talking about looking at my girlfriend through our windows, to the point where he had binoculars that he could use as well. The way our house is set up, the kitchen and laundry area both have large windows facing the backyard. At the time, we didn't have blinds or curtains there. I had lived alone before and never thought about it. My girlfriend usually changes clothes in the laundry room after work. When I heard that story, I felt my face getting hot and I was furious. I asked our neighbor if they had any extra private property signs because they had some put up around in their yard. They gave me one and a metal stake. I walked straight into our backyard with a hammer and planted the sign right by the fence line. The guy was outside when I did it. I yelled across the yard telling him to stay away from our property and stop watching our house. A couple other neighbors came outside because of the shouting. My girlfriend stayed inside the whole time. After that, I came back in. I taped a blanket over the laundry room window, and I told her we'd buy proper curtains the next day. Later that night, we looked the guy up online. It turned out that the stories were true. Years earlier, he had been arrested for abusing a relative, and he was also a registered offender. Thankfully, about 2 months later, we noticed a moving truck at his place. By the end of the week, he was gone. I live alone in a pretty small house that I'm renting. I've lived here for a few years now. The neighborhood is large, but generally pretty quiet. Last year, something happened that was really creepy. I still think about it all the time. So, one night, I was by myself at home in the living room. I didn't have work the following day, so I was staying up really late watching a movie. It was probably like 2 a.m., and I sat on my chair by the couch, and I remember that I heard a car come driving down the street. This was not that unusual, but with it being really late at night, I glanced over out the window. The car drove slowly down my street and then pulled over across the street from my house and a ways down from it. When I saw this, I did not recognize the car, but overall, I didn't think too much of it. I turned my attention back to the movie. However, maybe 2 or 3 minutes later, I heard a car door open and close, and I looked back over. I now saw a man emerging from the vehicle. He was wearing pretty much normal clothes, but then a blue Amazon vest over it. I realized that he was an Amazon delivery driver. It was strange that he was making a delivery at 2 o'clock in the morning, but it actually does happen. There are many people who have stuff shipped overnight, and I knew that some people who deliver for Amazon do not even drive the Amazon trucks and use their own vehicles. So I kept watching the man just out of curiosity. However, I noticed that he crossed the street and appeared to be walking straight for my house. When he started to enter my front yard, I quickly ducked down from my chair. My windows were mostly covered by the shades, but there was still a fairly large open spot where I could look out or someone could see in. I went down onto the carpet floor and then crawled behind my chair that I had been sitting on. I hadn't ordered anything on Amazon Prime at all, so I didn't know why this guy would go into my yard. Also, he didn't have any packages with him. I thought maybe he would come to my front door, but the way he had been walking was just into the yard. Things were silent until I heard footsteps arrive just outside my front living room window, just feet away from me. I very slowly and carefully peeked around the corner of the chair, just enough to see. The man was standing there right outside my living room window, looking in with his hands on the glass. I moved back out of sight, hoping that he didn't see me. I didn't know what was going on. The man remained there, just looking inside my house for probably a whole minute or so. Then I heard him walking away. I didn't know if he was going to try to break in or what. I moved out from behind the chair and saw that he was no longer at the window. I went over to the window and looked to see the man walking through the end of my yard and now entering my next door neighbor's yard. I watched him go right up to their front window and start looking in it the same way he had been to mine. The man was there for probably 30 seconds. Then I heard a neighborhood dog start barking. I'm not sure where the dog was. I didn't have one, but it sounded like it was either one of the houses next door to me, across, or possibly someplace else. Either way, when this happened, the man suddenly backed up and then walked away. He kind of jogged across the street back to his car. Then, moments later, he drove away. I was glad for the dog barking and glad that he was gone. It was really suspicious behavior. I decided to call the police non-emergency line and report it. Unfortunately, I really didn't have any good information. I didn't get a great look at the guy with it being nighttime and dark out, just a very basic description. I also didn't get a license plate, but just a basic look of the car. I didn't even know the exact make and model, but I thought that it was still good to report it. I think that maybe he was possibly thinking about breaking in, or maybe planning to break in later. Either way, he did not. I haven't seen the guy since, and I'm hoping that he didn't break into anybody else's place. I'm not sure if he was an actual Amazon delivery driver that was up to no good, or just pretending to be one to blend in. Either way, I see no reason for an Amazon Prime delivery driver to be looking in people's windows so late at night. Many years ago, when I was in high school, I have a memory that stands out as being rather creepy. I think I was a sophomore at the time, so I was still pretty young. We had this gym class, and we would play all kinds of games in it and stuff. We would play dodgeball quite a bit, and we would meet in the gym. So one day, I'm not sure if this was before class or at the end of class, but many kids were just kind of wandering around the gym and talking. We were either waiting for class to start or for the bell to ring for us to be let out. Anyways, I was with one of my friends at the time whose name was Josh. We were pretty good friends, and we would talk all the time in class. Both of us were just kind of wandering around the gym and talking. I'm not really sure why, but we just kind of wandered to this one back corner near the bleachers. In that main gym, it was used for the basketball games, so they had pull-out bleachers on a few sides. They were pushed back to the wall though, but they still took up some space. There was this area where whether the bleachers were back or up, you could still walk underneath them. It was kind of like a walking lane, but that's not really what it was for. Frequently trash would get stuck back there or whatever. It was kind of hard to see, and nobody would really ever go over there. I personally had never been back there before. So we were not going to go under the bleachers, but we happened to walk by kind of where you could see the entrance to go underneath them. When I did, I noticed that there was somebody there. At first, I thought that it was a student in our class, because that was a logical explanation. Josh saw the person as well, and we both stopped to look. This person was just standing there and not facing us, but the other direction. And they were also really far in there, like completely underneath the bleachers, exactly about halfway down. We were looking at this person for a few seconds. The longer I looked, the more I realized that it did not look like a student, but a grown man. Then they turned and looked over. It was a man, and he was not a student. He also did not appear to be one of the school maintenance workers. I would see a few of them around, and I recognized most of them. This guy wasn't one of them. This person wasn't doing any work either, but just standing there. As soon as the guy saw us, we both quickly moved away. Then we went back to where the rest of the class was. The man did not emerge from the bleachers. For some reason, I don't think we told anybody else, like the teacher. I'm not sure why, but I would just blame it on us being young and dumb. But anyways, for the rest of the class, I don't recall anything notable happening. But I do know that the next hour, I was in a normal class again. It was like English or something. But I remember that during that class period, there was a lockdown. It lasted for a while, maybe an hour, before it was finally over. Then the school day resumed. I remember hearing that there was a crazy guy in the school. I realized it was likely the man that we had encountered. How he got in the school, I don't know, but he was hiding under the bleachers in the gym. I'm not sure what his plans were, but I regret not reporting him to a teacher. I'm just glad that someone ended up seeing him and the school was locked down. He was obviously removed from the school and things could carry on, but it still creeps me out to think that I came face to face with that guy. I live by myself in an apartment. When I first moved in here, I got a rude awakening, literally. It was probably like my second or third week living here. I have a small one-bedroom apartment in a pretty decent building, and my place is on the second floor. It's a nice place overall, not a dump by any means, and most of the people seem nice. At the time, I didn't know any of my neighbors immediately around me though. So after a short time there, one night I was awoken to the sound of someone knocking loudly at my front door. I got up and out of bed, seeing that it was after midnight, and I went to see who was there. The knocking stopped by the time I arrived at the door though. When I looked through the peephole, nobody was there. It was strange. I was kind of creeped out by this odd event. Why would anybody come to my door so late? By the next day though, I had mostly forgot about it. However, a few nights later, the same thing happened again, except this time I was still awake. It was late at night, and I heard a knocking on the door. I got up and went to the peephole and saw this woman knocking. I didn't know what she wanted, so I went to open the door. I unlocked it first. However, as soon as I started to do this, I heard her take off running. By the time the door was open and I looked into the hallway, I saw her entering an apartment door just down the hall and across it. So she was my neighbor. I didn't know why she was seemingly pranking me like this. I went back in and was confused. but there was no more knocking that night. The very next night, though, she came back and knocked at my door again at around the same time, and once more ran away. It was pretty annoying, to be honest. I didn't know if she was pranking me or what. Maybe she was serious, maybe she wanted something, but every time I went to the door she would just run away. I let it go this time. However, the very next night she did it again, and I had it. I went to the door really fast, but she was already gone by then. So I walked over there and I knocked on her door. She didn't answer or do anything, so I knocked again, this time louder. When I did, I heard her yell really loud from the other side of the door. It was like she was right there on the other side, but I hadn't heard her walking over to the door. She told me to go away and stop bothering her so late at night. She sounded seriously angry. I could not believe her nerve. It was like she was acting like I was the one banging on her door all the time. I yelled that she was the one who kept knocking on my door, and I told her to stop. She interrupted me and yelled really loud for me to go away or she would call the cops. I was furious. I told her to do it, and then I banged on her door really loud one last time. Then I walked back to my apartment. The cops never came. But after that, she never knocked on my door late at night again either. I still live here. I don't think she lives there anymore though. I never saw her again around the building or anything. I haven't seen anyone coming or going from that apartment. However, I'm hoping that she does not currently still live here. I'm a delivery driver and have been one for many years. The craziest thing to happen to me took place roughly 20 years ago. I had just made one of my last deliveries for the night. I drove a pretty large truck. It was a box truck, and I made deliveries mostly to businesses in the area. I would sometimes work into the night, not super late, but it was probably like 8 p.m. by now. Still, I would be getting off very shortly. So I had finished up a delivery to a company in the sort of industrial part of town and was now driving out of it. By now these roads were very quiet. There was a winding road and it had 2 lanes, one going each direction. I remember that I came around a bend to a spot that was mostly going through the woods. There had been a car driving behind me, but no other cars in sight. That is, until I came to this spot in the woods and saw a car driving super slow up ahead. It was going like 20 miles per hour. As I approached it, the car only went slower and slower. Being in a large box truck, I normally didn't make maneuvers of passing anybody, but I figured that I would have to go around this car because I didn't know why it was driving so slow. It slowed down to probably like 5 miles per hour, and I had to slow way down as well. I started to move into the left lane to pass the car, but then it quickly made a turn to the left as well, as if to block me. That's instantly what it seemed like it was doing. I was confused. The car then stopped completely, and so did I in my truck. Meanwhile, the car behind me drove right up to within a few feet of my truck and then stopped. I wasn't sure what to do. But then I saw the door open to the car that was blocking my way, and a man got out. He started aggressively walking towards my truck. Meanwhile, I heard the door open to the car behind me as well. I realized that these guys had me blocked in and were coming after me. The only thing I could think to do was to drive away. My truck was a lot stronger than their measly cars, so I hit the gas and went forward. I turned, and the guy was still running to my driver's door. I hit part of his car, but my truck was easily able to keep moving. The man then ran away back towards his car. I went around him and kept going down the street. This led to the car behind me, and then later the damaged car, both following after me down the road. However, as I was driving, I called the cops on my cell phone. I told them what had happened and where I was and where I was going. I was hoping that the cops would get there and pull everybody over. However, not long after this, the cars both turned off onto another road behind me. The police arrived a few minutes later. I didn't have license plate numbers of the cars, but one of them was damaged. I was hoping that the guy would be found, but I never heard anything more. I think those guys were going to try to rob me or something, but I really don't know. I just know they were definitely up to no good, and I'm just glad that I got away from them. This is the story of something that happened back when I was in high school. It was during my junior year, and I remember that I got wind we were having a sub for 5th hour. This was the last hour of the day, by the way, so when I heard about the sub, I had the idea to skip class. I would not normally be one to be skipping classes all the time, and I should have not done it looking back. But here and there I might skip a class that I hated, especially if it was the last one of the day. Plus, I knew that substitutes would often just take attendance and give out a random assignment. We probably wouldn't be doing anything notable like a test. My plan was to leave my 4th hour class, get my stuff from my locker, and walk out the school doors during passing time. However, I failed to execute my plan properly. I got lazy, and when I got to the locker commons, I was talking to my friend there for too long. So when the warning bell rang, I barely heard it. I was engaged in a conversation, and the hallways quickly cleared out, and my friend then walked away to leave to his class. I then gathered my things from my locker and went to leave. But by that point, basically everyone had cleared out of the area. I was still going to walk to the doors to leave, but then I saw one of the hall monitors come down the stairs that were right next to those doors there. I quickly had to move away. I went down a different hallway and was now kicking myself. I missed my opportunity to leave the school. Now I would have to run around and avoid hall monitors to leave. When I was walking away, my plans were to find another exit. I couldn't go to class now or I would be late. The warning bell rang as I was walking there. I was too committed. So I walked down another hallway and then took a left. When I got there though, I heard footsteps just around a corner. I assumed it to be another hall monitor, maybe the same one I had seen before, and I started walking faster. But the footsteps seemed to speed up. There was a moment where I knew they saw me, because they were in the same hallway as me. I heard them come around a corner. They were still a long ways back though, but they were in the same hallway as me for a few seconds. I thought I was going to get yelled at, but they said nothing. And I also didn't look back to see who it was. After maybe 5 seconds, I turned a corner and was out of their sight again, and I walked even faster. I then went down that hallway and turned again. At this point, I was just trying to get away. I was heading to the complete opposite end of the school. I made it to the cafeteria and kept going. I walked along the edge of it as that was an area where people would definitely be around. When I made it past there, it led to a quieter hallway, which is where the Performing Arts Center was. This hallway had carpet on it, so it was quieter to walk and I couldn't hear the footsteps behind me as well. I also didn't bother to look back and see if anybody was there. I walked closer to the Performing Arts Center, or the PAC, which is what it was called. That's where they would have plays and whatnot. I arrived by the doors and tried to enter, but they were locked. So I went to the left and then around a corner. I had hoped that I could get in there because there were a lot of good hiding places as the lighting was very dark in there. However, with the doors being locked, I went to the left and around a corner. I wasn't hearing the footsteps anymore, but I wasn't going to take any chances. There was this seemingly random door near the PAC that I tried, and it just opened. It led to this small room that was maybe a storage closet or something like that. It had carpeted floors, and the lights were off, so it was pitch dark. So I couldn't really see anything in there, but I could sense that it was pretty small. I didn't dare turn a light on. I just hid there. About 30 seconds later, I heard someone walking by outside. Then things went quiet. For maybe 5 minutes, there was nothing. I thought about leaving, but deemed it too risky, so I did not. Then I heard an announcement. I couldn't hear that well with being in this hiding spot, but I was able to make out the word lockdown. This was crazy. I remained where I was, because obviously I couldn't leave here now. I hid in there and was completely quiet for the next 30 minutes or so. Nobody walked by or anything. Then the lockdown was lifted. I heard another announcement saying that it was over, and a short time after that I heard the bell and classes were dismissed for the day. Only then did I discreetly emerge and continue over to my locker, get my stuff, and then finally leave and go home. I later found out that some guy was in the school, and I think that's who was following me. The lesson I learned was to never skip class.